Former President Trump is speaking out after being indicted on alleged attempts to overturn the 2020 election. He's accusing the Biden Department of Justice of attempting to criminalize what he says is political speech. One legal analyst at CNN disagrees, saying that prosecutors may have been able to sidestep First Amendment concerns in their case against Trump. Let's watch.
Part of what's remarkable about it is what Jack Smith doesn't do, because to Laura's point about his speech on the ellipse, Trump's speech on the ellipse, Smith doesn't charge the speech on the ellipse. How he has to talk about January 6th. He has to talk about the violence. That's the end game. How does he do it? He says Trump exploited the violence. He talks about the 2:24 p.m. Pence tweet targeting Pence, and then the ways that Trump allowed the violence to further his scheme, including the calls that came in from the co-conspirators on that day to push forward even through the violence with the rest of the thing. It's very subtle, and it sidesteps a huge amount of First Amendment litigation.
Now, when it comes to arguments that prosecutors cannot prove Trump knew he was lying about the 2020 election results, here's what his former Attorney General Bill Barr had to say.
Do you think he knew that he lost the election?
Do I personally believe that? Yeah, at first I wasn't sure, but I have come to believe that he knew well that he had lost the election. And now, what I think is important is the government has assumed the burden of proving that. The government, in their indictment, takes the position that he had actual knowledge that he had lost the election and the election wasn't stolen through fraud. And they're going to have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt.
Which is a high bar, of course.
That's a high bar. Now, that leads me to believe that we're only seeing a tip of the iceberg on this.
You think
indictment.
Jack Smith has more?
Oh, yes. I would believe he has a lot more. And that's one of the things that impressed me about the indictment. It was very spare. And there were a lot of things he could have said in there. And I think there's a lot more to come. And I think they have a lot more evidence as to President Trump's state of mind.
Now, we spoke to attorney Alan Dershowitz about this yesterday, and here's what he said.
Here they don't seem to have a smoking gun, a gun, or any smoke at all. They seem to have lots of people who are prepared to testify, who will testify. Donald Trump actually believed that the election was stolen. He was wrong. He was dead wrong. But the Supreme Court of the United States has held repeatedly, there's no such thing as a false opinion under the First Amendment. If he had the opinion that he had won the election, then the corruption allegations can't stand.
So we went on to talk with him about the comparisons to the documents case and how there people thought, well, those that case might be weak as well if you can't prove that he knew he shouldn't have had the documents. But of course, there ended up being this vocal recording of him saying, I know that this is a classified document and I know I cannot now classify it by kind of executive fiat or oral statement or whatever. And so the question is Bill Barr right? Is there going to be evidence that is like that or similar to that can speak more firmly to President Trump's state of mind?
Well, look, Bill Barr is certainly right that there's going to be more than was simply alluded to in the indictment. And you're going to, I bet, you're going at the very least, you're going to have people like, what was her name? Cassidy Hutchinson, you remember her? Coming forward who will say, I believe Alyssa Farah Griffin on The View has said that in her time working in the election period, she heard Trump make a remark that sounded like him conceding that he had actually lost. So you have people like that who can, offer some evidence of Trump's mental state. The question, of course, will they produce something as clear as the recording of Trump himself in the documents case? So we can't rule it out because I think any of us predicted that they would have that strong piece of evidence. But this is, I can't say it any better than Alan Dershowitz, obviously. This is the fundamental issue that is going to develop in this case. And I would not want to be in the position of my entire case resting on whether I can prove that actually Donald Trump doesn't think he won the election, because he has sounded like he really thinks that an awful lot. But I obviously can't rule out, I don't know, maybe behind closed doors they have some kind of evidence of that, and they have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt that he really did know. And thus, all the things he said are, the saying part of it is obviously just protected speech regardless, but the plan being put into action as being part of some vast conspiracy of crime doesn't maybe look as criminal if it's part of a sincere motivation in the way that George W. Bush and Al Gore's efforts in 2000 were part of their sincere belief that.
Well, let's be really clear. The indictment doesn't allege or try to criminalize the process of discovering whether or not votes were taken accurately or counted accurately. Anything like that. There's no prohibition. There's no attempt to criminalize the idea of filing a lawsuit to figure out, as so many people have done from Jill Stein on down, to figure out if the election results were accurate. Stacey Abrams obviously has been doing that work in Georgia, somewhat unsuccessfully, these voter fraud lawsuits. That's not what is at issue here. The question is whether or not, having received the evidence that exists, having done the research, having pressed and pushed state election officials who are Republican and aligned with Trump in many cases to tell you if there was any fraud, to investigate whether it's any fraud. And then at that point being told by those figures that, no, we really looked and we have seen nothing. And moreover, the specific evidence of fraud that you're bringing to us to investigate, whether it's briefcases full of ballots and the like, are completely unsubstantiated. And so what you have in the indictment is people saying, well, I was rooting for you. I wanted to vote. I obviously hoped you won. But I'm sorry, despite all efforts, I can't find anything that would corroborate your view of the matter. You have co-conspirator number one, believed to be Rudy Giuliani, in the indictment saying, we have no evidence. I have a theory, but I have no evidence. And these admissions, at a certain point, I wonder if, from a legal perspective, admissions that there is no evidence of voter fraud, corroboration from your politically aligned people, secretaries of states and the like, state election officials, say that there was no voter fraud. If you maintain a belief that you won an election based on no evidence supporting it and ample evidence to the contrary, is your subjective, completely out of touch, borderline sort of narcissistic commitment to your victory enough to shield you from legal liability for actively trying to interfere in an election and call up Raffensperger and call up secretaries of state and say, I don't need you to confirm whether or not I lost or won. I need you to specifically find this number of votes that happens to be the vote margin between me and Joe Biden +1.
But again, the interference is not, he didn't kidnap anybody's family members or break anybody's legs. The interference is conversations with state officials that I think reflect very poorly on him and reflect on the part of something that is absolutely not true. But I mean, this is what's going to be decided. But I am troubled by how much in the indictment is, he tweeted this, he said this at a rally. It's his speech, and they're saying there was enough of it, and it was connected to something that was so wrong, and then we're going to argue about whether he knew it was actually wrong and whether it was pressure rather than just speech.
I don't know what to tell you, Robby. That stuff is color. There's always color in a
That doesn't set up
complaint.
red flags for you?
No, because the charge is what the charge is. Imagine this, Robby. Imagine there's a murder case that has nothing to do with anything. There's a dead body on the ground. This is not a speech issue. It's a tort. It's a murder. Are you saying that the indictment can't say so-and-so told so-and-so how much he hated the defendant told someone else that they hated the murder victim? Well, some of that is hearsay, but you know what I'm saying. Any evidence that they were talked about how much they planned to kill the person and confessed that they...
But there's no murder. The murder is just speech.
That's tantamount to saying a confession, entering confession into evidence is a speech violation, because if you say, you should be allowed to express that you killed somebody.
Of course, but there's no underlying murder. The murder here is just conversations with state officials.
No, it isn't. There's a law that prohibits you from trying to tamper with election results. That's what the issue is.
That's
using fraud.
He didn't steal any ballots, and he didn't smash any windows on the Capitol. I mean, look, I'm giving voice to the concern I have with this. But you know that's not what the plan was, Robby. And we discussed this on the last episode, yesterday's show. The plan was to create enough ambiguity
on the state level with people who are tasked constitutionally with certifying election results, so that they were unable to certify election results, not because the votes weren't accurately counted, but because he hoped that people would just lie on his behalf and say there was enough ambiguity to throw the question of the election straight to the House of Representatives, who could vote based on a state basis as opposed to the Electoral College.
I think the correct way to hold him accountable for the things he did was what they did. They impeached him, and he should have been removed from office.
But this is the law.
Barred from holding office again.
But your subjective belief that that's a way to hold him accountable versus this
what
way
he
to hold him
committed was
accountable.
conduct unbefitting of his office.
Right, and that's what he's being charged with, in a way that would preclude him potentially.
Criminal conspiracy.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Yes.
That's what we're going to find out.
Just because you happen to think that there would be another way to hold someone accountable that would be good doesn't mean that the law, that he doesn't have to prove that he didn't violate this law that he potentially violated.
They have to prove that he violated.
Sure, but he's the one on trial, and he's going to make the case that he did not know that he had lost the election. Even though everybody in his orbit...
He might make the case that he didn't lose the election. We don't have to wait what he says.
Yeah,
He persisted in that belief when he was interviewed on CNN.
And everybody in his orbit is going to be, who's basically admitted, we already know from the relatively skimpy information that we have in the indictment, that we know his co-conspirators acknowledged there was no proof. And if you're sitting there saying there's no proof that there was election fraud, we even acknowledge, we don't know that there's any evidence that there was election fraud. On what is the basis of your belief that you won? And I think that goes to a jury, and it's in D.C. And Dershowitz pointed out that he's probably going to try to remove it to a more friendly jurisdiction for him. But I wouldn't write off also, given how sloppy and foolish so many people in his orbit, as well as Donald Trump himself, have been, that there isn't going to be a recording, an email, a text, or something that says, yeah, I know it's over, but we got to keep going. So that's what is left to be discovered.
Yeah.
Did at any point Trump and or the co-conspirators, because they are likely to be separately charged, going to have committed to paper or voice recording their belief that there was no fraud, but they were going to try to create enough ambiguity to take the vote out of the public's hands, of the American people, and instead ask a bunch of elite millionaire, multimillionaire representatives, state by state in the House, to pick the president of the United States? That's the question. Right. That's it.
I mean, again, that wasn't an election. There is a procedure, right, for the House picking the president if there's no one gets a majority of the election. Again, this is like to say this is a criminal conspiracy,
if you're lying about triggering that procedure, yes. If you are fraudulently trying to induce election officials into...
Fraudulent induce?
Yes. Threatening and pressuring. He literally threatened Raffensperger on the call. We know that he threatened these officials, saying, I don't want to misquote him, but I wish I had the document in front of me right now. But yes, we know that that's not...
I think it's ambiguous about whether it was a threat.
All right.
But we will continue to discuss this probably a lot in the coming days, weeks, months, and years. More Rising after this.